Hey, everybody, welcome back to We Got Balls. And Scott and Chris here. We are getting charged up right in the middle of this conversation about the science of masturbation. And today is the episode that many of you guys have been waiting for. It's how often does it happen? How often can I get it? And that is the question that almost every young boy turning into a man wants to say. I mean, the jokes that you've heard, right, Scott, is how many times did you do it today? I was watching Wolf of Wall Street a few weekends ago. Man, you got to pump those numbers up. Those once or twice a week, them's is rookie numbers. I do it 3 times a day.
You got to beat it like it owes you money, Chris.
Beat it like it owes you money. That's a great Chappelle show line. So if you're interested in how often, the frequency of your orgasm, how often do you need it for health? And also, if you're struggling with feeling like you're doing it too often, you want to keep listening to this episode, and we'll be right back.
Welcome to We Got Balls, real, raw, masculine sex talk with Chris Inman and Scott Cohn. Here we go.
Hey guys, we're back, and we are having a conversation today about frequency of your orgasm, frequency of sex, frequency of masturbation. And so that's a whole big conversation, Scott. What the guys are wondering, how often is enough? What is too much? What are the things that in my masturbation, does that damage the ability for me to connect with a partner? What are all the question marks and the things that I don't know how to really address in my life? I mean, nobody's talked to me about this stuff, right, Scott? I mean, we don't get this conversation, well, son. I mean, you did. You got as long as you don't do it more than 3 times in a week.
That's right. My father taught me how to do it right. And so we're going to stick with 3 times a week here, boys. So you can choke that chicken 3 times a week, but if it's more than that, it's a problem.
You're going to hell, or your palms will fall off, whatever it is,
or your wiener will fall off.
That will happen.
So, So, this comes out of not only our experiences and lack of education around masturbation, but also kind of what I decided to do as a father and engaging my sons as they were growing up and developing around the subject. And as I've talked about this, as I've been a recovery coach, now for 4 years, one of the things I did was kind of put this together into a framework for helping guys think about masturbation. Because again, our position on masturbation is, it's not what you would typically find with Christians. It's not what you would typically find even in the recovery community. Our position is, well, it depends on whether, if you ask us, is masturbation good or bad? We're going to go, neither.
It's a thing. It's a thing in the world that happens. And I don't think you can put it into a box, good or bad. I think there's ways you can make it harmful and there's ways it can be helpful. And so we're not going to tell you the right way to masturbate or not. That would be really weird if we had a how-to masturbation video. I don't think
it would be very popular. If we
I'm sure it would, but we're not doing that. But to your point, I think that in this conversation, what we do want to do is put some context around what happens when we choose to masturbate or not, and what are the aspects of this. And I can tell you, Scott, from my own personal life and many guys that I've talked to, this frequency gap question is a huge question. How often is too much? And really, for maybe even health purposes, if I'm trying to be sober and not masturbating, is it going to damage me? Is it going to harm me? Is it going to do something in my life that's not healthy?
Yeah. So just to back up for a second, we had this convention that we've been using in this series on the science of masturbation, which was the arousal gap, the duration gap. Today we're talking about the frequency gap, and coming up we'll be talking about the sensation gap, and then the connection gap. Ooh. So what I did was I talked to my sons and kind of developed this for the guys I coach is, as you're thinking about masturbation and the role that you want that to play in your recovery journey or not, you might want to think about these 5 factors that have some kind of bearing on your sexuality and masturbation habits and how they might relate to partnered sex and so on. So we're talking about frequency because it is one of those things that can create a gap in your relationship with your partner. And it starts again, very early. But I want to say this about frequency, because there's a lot of news on this subject about how many times a month should a man ejaculate. And I just wanted to read.
Wait, can I guess? I haven't read the article. You just sent it to me, so I haven't read it. So how many times a month is a healthy ejaculation pattern? And this is not, partnered sex versus masturbation. This is just having an orgasm and ejaculating, right?
Yeah, and this is related to prostate cancer. And so this was just released in the last month.
Okay, so let me guess. I'm going to guess it's going to be 15 times a month.
And you're significantly low.
Oh, dang. I got to go up. Got to raise them numbers up. Them's his rookie numbers, guys.
You're talking junior high school level.
Junior high school league numbers.
So the research that was released August 12th of this year, which was a review, a meta-analysis of studies dating back for 30 years, found that the more often men ejaculate, the less likely they are to develop prostate cancer. And researchers recommended climaxing 21 times per month because the literature suggested it lowered the risk of the disease by 1/3. Well, that's a significant difference, right? So
I've also read older studies. This is a new study, so obviously the science is changing.
But it's a meta-analysis of all those older studies. So meta-analysis are not original studies. They're looking at all the other studies and looking at the variables between them.
So this is up to date. So
yeah.
So for guys who say, well, that's a lot, it is a lot. I mean, whether you're masturbating or having intercourse, that's 2 out of every 3 days, right?
Yeah, it's pretty much most of the days of the month. So you need to ejaculate almost every day. And the research also indicates that if you do this while you're younger, obviously as you get older, your refractory period becomes longer. Refractory period, for those who don't know the term, means the amount of time it takes for me to get an erection and ejaculate again between ejaculation or sexual events. So if I ejaculate, it's my refractory period when I'm a teenager might be a second, a minute.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I can
when
get
when you're in your 40s and 50s, it might be 2 hours or
2 or 3
half
hours.
a day or whatever. Yeah.
And there's a lot of variation in men too, because penis sensation decreases after you ejaculate. So it's about how that sensation gets back up to where, again, sex becomes pleasurable instead of kind of annoying. So the research indicated that the younger you are, the frequency is most important in your youth, and then it kind of decreases over age, but it still is a factor. So this becomes an issue like in recovery groups where the goal is absolute abstinence from any kind of masturbation and just partnered sex. Because 21 times a month, that means your wife's got to be interested and open to being sexual, most of the time.
And Scott, I'm just going to volunteer. That hasn't ever happened in my relationship. I don't know. There are some stories that I read. I don't know if they're fictitious or not. Oh, my wife is always ready. One of the greatest stories I saw was Julia Child in the movie Julie and Julia talks about her husband would come home from work and they would have a nice lunch and then they would go retire to the bedroom and then he would take a nap. The implication was every day after work they're having sex every day. And I'm like, that's great. I don't know very many people that have that experience. So what do you do if you're in that dynamic where your partner, that's not their frequency? And there's a whole science about sexual pursuer and sexual responder kind of deal in relational dynamics that we won't get into. But how do you process that? And especially that this study seems to back up a lot of guys. I need sex. Scientifically, I need sex.
Okay, so let's talk about this for a second, because I think frequency is grounded in that sense of I need sex. I need to have an orgasm or I need to ejaculate. So the guy, Jaak Penskeep, who's done a lot of the research on this, or I may be pronouncing his last name wrong, I typically do, but he did research on the affective neurocircuits in our brainstem that generate all emotions. And he identified these 7 circuits, and they are care, play, sexual lust, seeking, and those all feel really good in the body. And then there's panic, loss, rage, and terror. And those are circuits that generate unpleasant feelings, and they tend to be the circuits upon which our attachment system is built, all of these. So when we've talked about attachment in the past, how I form bonds with other people, intimate bonds in particular, those attachment circuits are like the software that runs on these hardware circuits that are hardwired into our system and into our neurobiology, into our nervous system, into our brainstem. And so sexual lust is one of those. So there is a need in all mammals and then human beings as well. There is a need for sexual lust. There is a need to have sexual experience. And so you can say that it's not a need. And, you know, I've read Emily Nagoski's book, Come Together, which is built on the idea of these circuits. And she says in the book, sex is not a need, but then she talks about these circuits. And so it's a little bit of my going, wait a second, if they're primal circuits in the brainstem, they're a physiological need.
So let's differentiate the two things. In an ideal world with healthy, safe attachment and connection, it's great to have sex 21, 25 every day of the month. It's great. But what I think Emily's talking about, and what I've studied and understood in recovery, is when you don't have secure attachment, which the majority of the people that are struggling with their sexuality do not. In fact, I would say all of them do not. So when you're struggling with you attach to the behavior rather than the individual. And we'll get to connection later on in our series. But when you start attaching to the behavior, and it's not the connection that you need, it's the orgasm that you need. The orgasm literally becomes like a cocaine-like drug in your brain. And I mean, they've done research on giving mice orgasms, and they'll push that button till they're dead, because there's only so much that your body can take chemically, and the diminishing returns of having orgasm after orgasm. And that attachment itself is what I think she means when she says the orgasm is not a need. Sex and connection and healthy attachment via sexual experience, embodied connective experience with your genitals, with your body itself, that is a need. We as human beings need to be touched, cared for, nurtured, pursued, desired, aroused, all those things.
And she says that in the book, that touch is a need, orgasm is not a need. But now in this case with this research, I would say if it's indicative of, if a man ejaculates more frequently, he's going to have a much lower chance of developing prostate cancer. What do you do with that?
Well, so then you work on your relationships, you work on yourself, you work on connecting with people who will be able to provide that level of care with you and for you, or you come to an agreement, as we have talked about, which is, you know what, sometimes I just need to masturbate. And is that okay with you? If I go in the shower and I feel disconnected in my body, and I'm not doing it to objectify anybody. I just need the sensation of an orgasm right now, because that's what I want. And I think there's areas in between that. It doesn't have to be so black and white. Either I'm going to go look at porn and lust and objectify a bunch of people and make it compulsive, or I'm only going to have sex with one person, and that's the only way I'm ever going to get release. And if my wife isn't the one giving me the orgasm, then I can't have an orgasm. There's a whole spectrum in between that needs to be negotiated, which is why we're not giving any answers.
Yeah. So for example, my wife, she has asked me not to masturbate by myself, but she's like, hey, if I'm not in the mood and you feel like you need a sexual release, I'm happy to have you masturbate for me. So it becomes a part of our relational experience instead of me going off by myself and being disconnected. So that's another option that's available to couples. But like you said, I think you have to have a discussion about this. If this research seems to be as valid as it is, men probably do need to be ejaculating more frequently if they want to reduce the risk of prostate cancer. And prostate cancer is one of the top cancers that men get. And so it does need to be something that we think about. And one of the interesting things about the research is kind of digging into the mechanism behind this. So if your prostate is filled up with, not just semen, but other chemicals that are in your body, you can see why then frequent ejaculation would get kind of those chemicals out that instead would just sit in your prostate and maybe lead to cell damage.
So you're saying it's the same thing as, urinating regularly, as you clean out your bladder and your kidneys, it's removing the toxins from your body that's designed to be removed.
There would be a physiological need. But I want to go back to what you just said about sexual addiction kind of gets deep. So where does sexual addiction form? Alexandra Cathicus really proposes, and I think she's really right in her book, Sex Addiction as Affect Dysregulation, that sexual addiction can really be conceived of as three maladaptive circuits in the brain. So the seeking circuit that we talked about, these affective circuits that we all have, that all mammals have, that seeking circuit and the sexual lust circuit become decoupled from the care and the play circuits. And they do function as independent looped circuits. And so you end up seeking sex as an end unto itself instead of seeking it for care, play, then sexual lust comes out of it. The other circuits are limbic circuits that deal with emotional dysregulation, and then cognitive circuits, which deal with kind of delusions, cognitive distortions, just impaired thinking ability. So those three areas of the brain get damaged in development, and sexual addiction comes out of that development. As we talked about, a lot of it is attachment based.
So those circuits, just so that you know, it's the ways that we connect. I mean, we're hardwired to connect adventure, love, arousal, all those things are in our bodies. And when we're young, we have to be shown that and have that modeled and explained to us in a healthy, progressive way. So obviously when you're a baby, when you're held, when you're comforted, when you're soothed, when you're upset, all those things build that secure attachment. When you're not, you begin to find you begin to find links for those circuits on your own.
Yeah. And that becomes auto-regulatory behavior. So masturbation is one of those behaviors that little children develop to soothe themselves because they are not being soothed.
Let's be very clear. So when you're masturbating at 4 and 5 and 6 years old, what are you doing?
Calming yourself, caring for yourself, because there's nobody there caring for you or calming you.
Yes. And I think a lot of people, when they think about that, there's something that was wrong with me. I was, sexually adventurous or promiscuous, or no, you were not sexually adventurous or promiscuous. You made a connection in your body that nobody showed you how to do. You just happened on it, whether you're in the shower or putting your hand in your pocket or rubbing up against a bench or whatever it was. And that made you feel good in your body. And so that connection was made. But it short-circuited just what you said, the care and the relationship piece of the connection. It went from I need to be aroused to I have an orgasm, and that loop was made in the body. And now you feel like I have to have this to, and what's your word that we talk about, survival? What?
Survival strategies.
Yeah. It becomes a survival strategy, hardwired in a child's body that they have no clue where it came from. And because then you may get told, well, touching yourself is bad, or you shouldn't do that, or, you're going to go to hell, or whatever it is if you masturbate, then that's where the dysregulation and the shame starts to come in.
Yeah. So shame begins to attach to all that circuitry, but it's all wired together. So your arousal structures are built around that sense of self-soothing. When I get anxious, I need to be soothed. When I soothe, I go to my penis. When I go to my penis, I feel shame. That's how that works. And then it just becomes this vicious cycle. And so the invitation is, here, can you be kind to that little boy who had nobody to care for his emotional life? There was nobody to give him soothing, caring touch. There was nobody to play with him. So he ends up caring for and playing with himself as a way to soothe and a way to feel connected. And there's nothing wrong with him. That is a completely normal response to growing up in an environment where your emotions are not attuned to, where you're not being touched, where you're not being cared for, where you're not being played with. And I just want to invite everybody listening now to have a heart of tenderness towards themselves. If masturbation has been a part of my story since I was 3, since I was 5, since I was 7, right? Your body is telling you something about how you were raised. Your body is telling you something about your attachment to your parents. So again, we're not shaming masturbation at all. We're just asking you to be curious about how this came into your life and how it has served you, and particularly regarding frequency. The more frequent this was in your life, the more you needed care.
Yes. And so as you remember and think about that process and how you learn to care for yourself via masturbation, things change. Your body develops, your body grows, you learn new stimuli to help you along in the process. Maybe your relationships improve, maybe they get even worse. But at some point in your life, you become an adult and you have this pattern, this habit of masturbating to self-soothe. And then a person comes in your life that you want to connect with. And they don't have that history of self-soothing with masturbation necessarily. Maybe they do. Occasionally I've found it to be true, but a lot of times there's a big gap, and we'll get to that again in the connection gap. But when you come into a relationship and you're trying to partner with someone and do life with them, and you say, I masturbate every day. I masturbate 2 times a day. If you even have the conversation, Scott, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times that conversation never even gets had.
Nobody has a conversation with their partner when you're dating or you're exploring getting engaged. Hey, do you masturbate? How many times do you do that? Do you use pornography when you masturbate? What else do you do? Do you use sex toys? Blah 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 blah.
Yeah, that doesn't happen. So
Never.
Occasionally you might, occasionally I masturbate, or I might have a lust problem. I've heard that.
Yeah,
but
please pray for me because I'm struggling with lust.
Yeah, that usually is how it comes out. But then you get into a relationship and into a commitment, whether it's marriage or another arrangement, but oftentimes into a marriage, and you expect that partner to help you keep up that cycle of self-soothing via sex.
And that's exactly what happens. And what that does is it puts a tremendous burden on the relationship that ends up killing desire. So even if your desire level is up here because you have trained yourself to expect a certain level of sexual frequency, it is not.
Our podcast friend Scott is saying up to the very top. You're 100%. I need this.
So it's not uncommon for guys we work with, Chris, especially if they're younger men, to masturbate 6 or 7 times a day. Not uncommon. And I don't have any shocked face about that, because I understand that they're coming from a lot of emotional dysregulation in their family system. They've had sexual abuse, probably. They've had racism. They've had other kinds of abuse that have really hijacked and fried their nervous system, and they need something to soothe them. And this is what they learned very early on did the trick. This always worked. And so the more you're masturbating is inviting you to curiosity about, at what point in my life did I start to do this so frequently and felt like I needed this? So my need level is up here with the frequency of my sexual orgasm experience, and my partner's is down here, not in a because hyposexual would be way below.
It'd be like 0 or close to 0.
Yeah. And by the way, hypersexuality, an insistent compulsive need for more and more and more, and hyposexuality are all symptoms of trauma, right? I can respond to trauma in one way or the other, or I can vacillate between those two positions. I can go through binging and purging, and I go, hog wild, having masturbation sessions all night long. And then I stop and I swear I'm never going to do it again. I just don't want to be sexual at all. And man, that is a crazy train. And we got to be kind to ourselves when we see that kind of repetitive pattern in one of those 3 ways. But let's say you're up here, your spouse is here. When you bring your demand to your spouse, and it's a demand rather than an invitation, it's going to kill desire eventually.
Yeah. So let's just flesh this out. I need to have sex 5 times a week, every day, at least 3 times a week, or I'm going to be angry, whatever the phrase is. And that's the demand language, right? Instead of, I grew up where I used sex as a coping behavior, not with other people, with myself. And I just have to tell you that. And dudes, I have to tell you, if you want to get healthy and you can't be vulnerable, I'm sorry, you can't get healthy. Vulnerability is part of the growth process. This is hard shit. Welcome to masculinity.
Well,
hard
and you
shit
may
is
not
good
be able
shit.
to have that conversation with your wife if she's a very shaming person. Like
And
you
may
could
not.
say, "Hey, I want to be vulnerable with you. I grew up having to self-soothe myself with masturbation about 8 times a week." And she's going, "Well, what's wrong with you? There's something really wrong with you. You should get control of that. You need to just stop it." That's
And
not
so
going to help either.
And so that's where, in having these conversations, you can try to the level that you feel like is safe. If you can't try one-on-one, you can always try with a therapist, bring in a third party to help moderate a conversation. You can have vulnerable conversations with guy friends and talk to them about what's going on and get their input and what might have worked for them and what they might see in the situation if they know you and they know your spouse. So there's all kind of ways that you can do this, but the key is to say, listen, you have to be aware. Is your need for sex connecting? Your frequency need for sex, is it connecting or is it auto regulatory? And that's what we do in recovery work, is help guys understand there are other ways to meet those auto regulatory needs without having an orgasm.
Yeah. And just a couple of examples of how this works. And, guys that I've coached, they have an anxious attachment style, for example. So in the anxious attachment style, I was raised in a home where I had really unpredictable caregiving. Sometimes my mother and father were there, sometimes they weren't. And so my nervous system kind of is always anticipating a sense of, when I cry, when I have need, nobody comes, or sometimes they will come, but I never know when. And so in my relationship with so I learned to masturbate, to auto-regulate, and to kind of deal with my anxiety and that sense of I'm alone. Aloneness is a very typical feeling in the body in which this is used to regulate, right? I'm alone. I feel disconnected. I feel really unpleasant. And so I'm looking for pleasure. So I learned to do that 6 times a day. I get engaged and I get married, and I don't talk to my spouse about how this developed in my life, that I even have this problem masturbating. But I realize I'm married now, I can have sex. And so I take my expectation for having sex 6 times a day to my wife. And she's like, whoa, I'm complete, like when we first get married, yeah, maybe. But after the first year of marriage, it's not going to be 6 times a day, guaranteed. Once you start having kids.
Year after the honeymoon, you ain't getting it 6 times a day. Yeah.
It depends on your wife's libido. I mean, some wives have high sex drives, but
maybe.
But it's rare. So, but at a certain point, you're going to have kids, and you're not going to be able to maintain that level of expectation. But your body's going to want to. So, what are you going to do? And the silence of never having had the conversation becomes a problem. So you start to masturbate in secret, because frankly, that's how you had to do it as a child. You had to take your desires and go soothe yourself alone, and you could only do it in certain ways. If you were in the shower too long, your dad would knock on the door. Stop doing that. If you did it too often, your mother would notice that your sheets were getting sticky all the time. Blah, blah, blah. There's all these reasons.
And let me say that the 2 groups of people that we see most frequently are the guys who expected there to be sexual satisfaction in their marriage, and they came in and they weren't vulnerable with their wife for whatever reason, if it wasn't safe or whatever, and now they're masturbating in secrecy, and they're living in shame, and it's gone on for years and years and years. That's group 1. Group 2 is the guys who want to be in a relationship, and they masturbate compulsively, and they're afraid that they can't be in a relationship because the woman will never accept them if they're masturbating compulsively, and so I've got to stop this. It's the relational component that drives guys to act and do something differently, right?
And those both come under the heading of ambivalent attachment style, because that ambivalent attachment style is built around, I want relationship, but I fear that it's going to go away. And so I become clingy and overly demanding and needy. And what that does to the desire that the other person has, even if they have kind of a normal baseline desire, is it will start to push it down, because who wants that kind of demand placed upon their sexual life? Nobody.
Which reduces frequency, and the gap grows.
And now the gap grows.
Yeah.
So that's type 1. The second type of man that we see is somebody who has avoidant attachment style, and they grew up in a home where nobody was there. really disengaged, harsh, a lot of rules, regulations. So there's a kind of a brick wall of connection, and they just learn to soothe themselves. And that's what they do. They don't really need anybody else anymore. And if they do have sex with other people, it's not relational. It's all transactional. So that becomes a problem, because when you're having sex with your wife and it's a transaction, she can tell. And so what does that do to desire? I feel like I'm being used as a sex toy. I'm not all that interested in being used as an object by my husband. I don't think I want to have sex as much. And desire plummets and frequency plummets. And now the crazy cycle is back.
I'm back in shame. I'm back alone. What's wrong with me? All those things.
Now, the last attachment style is disorganized, and that comes out of a home where the parents are the source of harm. It's very sad, and it leads to you doing one or the other that we just talked about.
Like a ping pong ball bouncing back and forth.
I don't have any organized style of not attaching, right? I have an insecure attachment style, but I'm not sure which one works, because I could never predict anything.
Yeah.
And so I just bounce back and forth, and that's why it's called disorganized, because there's no discernible structure to how I go about either seeking or disconnecting from connection. And that individual will probably use masturbation more than all the others combined, because their nervous system never felt safe in their home.
Yep.
Ever.
Yep.
So
guys, if you want to know how to address these issues, there's a lot deeper well and a lot more background behind how we get to where we are. The number one invitation is going to be to connect. And it takes another person to heal our shame. Shame is created in relationship, and it's only healed in relationship. And so all we can invite you to do is to find somebody to talk to. And if that's one of us, we're glad to talk to you about that. We have some great opportunities coming up. And Scott, I want to mention this because one of our events, our Nashville retreat, which is great location in Thompson Station, Tennessee. So if you want to sign up, do it today. Links are in the show notes below. Jump on that and make sure that you book that in. As soon as that one fills up, we'll open up our registration for the Gulf Shores retreat, which will be in January. But we want to make sure that you guys connect, and in person is the best. I mean, would you agree, Scott? There's
absolutely.
a totally different thing of being in the same room with guys who struggle like you.
In fact, I would go so far as to say, guys, if you don't have at least a twice a year, or if you can afford it, a quarterly kind of in-person men's connection event planned for you for the coming year, figure it out, because it will make a huge difference in your own personal growth, in the friendships that you can develop, and just the healing that you can experience. There is nothing like eye contact and physical touch with other men when you're in the same room. It's
and
that's how we heal and play.
And part of this is we take downtime to just hang out and talk. And that's where the belief is built that I am not broken and beyond help. When someone can spend time with me and say kind things toward me, and I go, wow, maybe this can be different. By myself, in isolation, in my loneliness, masturbating 6 or 7 times a day, I'm never going to believe that.
Yeah.
But if I have experience with a guy, it might change things.
So what's the solution to over-frequent masturbation? It's not trying harder, and it's not just stopping it. It's more connection.
Yes. Because that's what you wanted all along.
So also, guys, we, in addition to the retreats, we do weekly coaching as well as weekly men's groups. And so we have some room for those as well. So if you're looking for help, we're getting a lot of guys from the podcast who are coming to us asking for help and really finding it. They've never found it before until they found our podcast. And let me assure you, there's nothing like being in a weekly group of other men on the same journey as well. So we want to invite you to that, which you can find out about on our website
at successfulmen.com, SEXCESSFULMEN.com. I think I spelled it right, but if I didn't, it's down in the show notes. So guys, whatever you do to take care of yourself, however often you do it, it doesn't matter. We're glad to be with you right here on We Got Balls.
And you do too.
Take care, everybody.
Don't forget to subscribe for more episodes. You can connect with Chris and with Scott at successfulmen.com.